What's up, everybody? We're here today ranking all the vehicles in Aetherdrift Limited. I thought a tier list might be kind of a fun way to share some thoughts on the format now that we're, a week and a half in. The format has sort of settled. There are 42 draftable vehicles here that I've got on my tier list, and some are very good, some are very bad, and some are sort of in that middle ground where sometimes you want them, sometimes you don't. Since, many of these are kind of hard to evaluate cards, I figured it was worth just pinpointing how I'm seeing them, roughly how good they are, my experience with them so far. So yeah, that's what we're in for today. Let's go over our tiers quickly before we jump in. So we've got 5 tiers here. The first tier, S tier, these are some of the best cards in the set. These are going to be your bomb rares, your first picks. A few uncommons I do think are going to sneak into this tier, but these are like you open a pack and you just hope to see these cards. A tier, right below that. This is the tier I'm listing as always play / pick highly. Not quite that bomb level, but premium uncommon, some of the better common vehicles, they're going to go in here. The B tier, this is your pull into a color. So think solid common playable, solid uncommon playable, a card that, it raises an eyebrow when you see it in the pack, but maybe not a card where if you got an 8th pick, you're like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? Your C tier, this is your filler / role player tier. This is the tier you're going to find cards where, sometimes you play these cards, sometimes you don't. Sometimes they just fill out your curve. Sometimes they fill a certain role in your deck. Maybe they fix your mana or something like that. So cards that might make your deck, might not. Then we've got the last tier here, the D tier, which I've listed as generally avoid, which means that, it's not like you're never going to play these cards, but most of the time they are not going to make the cut. They're not going to be in your best 23rd cards. If they do make the cut, either you had kind of a rocky draft or they're playing like a very, very specific role in your deck. Anyways, let's jump in. Our first card here is Air Response Unit. So this is 3 and a white for a 3/3 Crew 1 Flying Vigilance vehicle. This is the kind of vehicle that I'm not super fond of. It doesn't have an enter the battlefield effect. It has no static ability. And if it were just a creature, like if it was a 3-mana 3/3 Flying Vigilance, just no vehicle, I think it would be good, but not busted. And just being a vehicle, that's a hoop to jump through. It's just strategically worse than a creature. And the other layer on top of this card that makes me not like it very much is the white aggressive strategies in this format have not panned out to be very good. I have drafted a few white aggressive decks in the past week that I felt it was right to do so in the draft I was in. I don't think these decks are completely unplayable. But at the same time, I don't think Air Response Unit makes your white aggro deck all that much better. So I'm going to put this in the generally avoid category because I think, one, you should generally avoid white aggro, which is really the only place this card is going to go. And even in that deck, it's not going to be a card that you're very, very happy about. It's going to be a filler card no matter what. Broadcast Rambler is a 4 and a white 5/4 Crew 1 common vehicle that comes with a 1/1 flyer. This one I am a fan of. So I think this card is good in your more aggressive decks, good in your slower decks, good in your mid-range decks, like just generally a pretty good card. It's self-crews, and that's a big thing, right? Any of the vehicles that self-crew either through an exhaust cost or through a token that it comes with, or maybe somehow it brings a creature, that already bumps it up to being like, yeah, I basically count this as a creature. The body's pretty big. It trades with a lot of the big green things. The 1/1 flyer is nice, just giving you 2 artifacts for anytime you care about artifacts. So if you're in blue-white, you really appreciate this card. Maybe if you're in blue-white, you power this out on turn 4 with the blue mana dork that taps to add blue mana for an artifact. So yeah, I generally like Broadcast Rambler. I'm kind of debating between the B tier and the C tier. I think I'm going to ultimately put it in the C tier because while I do like it, I don't think it's quite a pull into white. White is the weakest color in this format, and I think if you're getting pulled into white, you're getting pulled in for good uncommons, good rares, not because of commons. So if you're playing a white deck, I'm happy to play 2, sometimes even 3 copies of Rambler, but gonna be a filler card still, even though it is a pretty solid vehicle. The Tension Chariot is up next. This is 4 white for a 6/6 vehicle, Crew 3. When it enters, you exile a artifact or creature until it leaves the battlefield. It's also got cycling for a single white mana. I like but don't love Detention Chariot. It's a 6 mana card, which, always comes with its costs. Cycling offsets those costs, of course, but if we're just evaluating it for the effect of what it does when it comes in, you get to essentially kill anything, but the issue with it is that if you target something with a good enter the battlefield effect, you can really get blown out if your opponent kills the chariot, either with, maybe a broken wings, even if you're not crewing it, or if you do end up crewing it, just any creature removal spell. And that actually leads into the second point where it's just like, well, because there's a real big cost for this thing dying, you often don't want to crew it unless it's really safe to do so. You know, your opponent doesn't have open mana, it's not going to die in combat to a combat trick. You really only want to attack or block with it in certain spots. So it's sort of just like a 6 mana expensive removal spell, it feels like, that sometimes becomes a creature. That cycling cost is interesting because you can reanimate it with some cards. So say you're in black-white, you've got the 5 mana reanimation spell back on the road. You've also got the possibility of, you know, maybe you're like an Obzon deck splashing this in a black-green deck with other reanimation spells. So there's some play there. But in general, I think it's nothing special. So this, again, kind of hovers between the pull into a color and filler role player role. But just like the Broadcast Rambler, because white isn't amazing, I still think it's a filler card. It's not a card that would make you want to draft white. It's a card you'll be happy with once you're already in white. Next up is Spot Cycle Scouter. So this is 1 in a white for a 3/2 crew 1. And when it enters the battlefield, you scry 2. So this one is very easy. I can just plop into the D tier. Everything I said about Air Response Unit, it being, you know, it's very vanilla. You know, if it was just a creature, it wouldn't be busted. And the fact that it's a vehicle, you've got a hoop to jump through. It's just not something that's very appealing. I think out of all the vehicles, maybe there's like one I'm forgetting off the top of my head that's worse, but this might be the worst one. Like, I really would avoid putting this card in my deck. I think something has gone wrong if this makes its way into your deck. Salvation Engine is up next. So this one's a mythic. It's 4 in a white for a 6/10 crew 6 vehicle. It's got the static ability of giving all your artifact creatures +2/+2. And when this attacks, you can return an artifact from your graveyard to the battlefield. So firmly in the build around territory, pretty much exclusively a blue-white card. I mean, I can imagine another color pair where you somehow get enough artifact creatures for this card to be good, but really you want to be making use of both of the abilities. You want to be making sure that it's pumping a good number of your creatures. You're making sure that you can get back an artifact every time this attacks, or at least almost every time this attacks. Basically, if this doesn't have immediate impact when it comes down, it doesn't pump a creature or two, I don't think you want it. So you're looking for 10, 11 artifact creatures or creatures that make artifacts. I think if you're there, it's a playable card. It's not a card I would first pick and try to build around, but if I got this maybe third or fourth pick, I might speculate on it. Because look, it is a really powerful card. I think that the Anthem ability is pretty nice. The ability to recur things is nice. 6/10 is gigantic. Like, this thing almost never dies in combat. So I think the best of the bunch when it gets there out of all the cards that we've looked at so far, but also the one that has the most hoops to jump through, the most build around. So I'm going to put this in the pull into a color tier, but that's a proceed with caution because it's pull into blue-white specifically. Good when you're there, but requires some deck building, and it's not just easily going to be a good card in every deck. Skyseer's Chariot is up next. This is 1 in a white for a 3/3 flyer with crew 2 vehicle. When it enters, you call a non-land card name, and cards of that name, their activated abilities cost 2 more to activate. This one's pretty solid. It's nothing special, but it's an efficient little beater. It can disrupt an opponent's vehicles. You know, it costs them 2 mana to crew a vehicle. There's actually a decent number of activated abilities in the set when you consider exhaust costs and just creatures that have, you know, random abilities. Like, there's like a 2 mana 2/2 in green that has a 5 mana ability to look at the top 5 cards, take an all-night card there. So there's a lot of activated abilities running around the set. I'm going to put this in the C tier. Again, it's just like a solid card, nothing that pulls you into white, but you're happy to play it if you do end up in a white deck. Voyager Glidecar is up next. This is a single white mana for a 2/3 crew 1 vehicle. When it enters the battlefield, you scry 1. You can tap 3 untapped creatures you control to give this thing a +1/+1 counter and flying until end of turn. I see this card as very similar to Skyseer's Chariot, where just a nice little efficient vehicle. It does enough little things. It can scale as the game goes on. You're a bit scared of this card when your opponent plays it on turn 1. So again, it's not a card that I'm like, ooh, I'm going to take this card and draft a white aggro deck because of it. But if you do find yourself there, or if you see this, you know, middle of the pack, nobody else wants to be white, yeah, I'd be happy to speculate on it. I'd be happy to play this card. So I'm going to put the Glidecar, just as I graded the Chariots, in the C tier here. And worth noting, I think if Glidecar or Chariot were different colors, I would probably put them into the pull into a color category, right? But because they're white, because they're in a color that I want to be really pulled in, only if it's very open, or if I have a very good white card, like one of the best in the set, that's what really pulls me into the color. These last few cards, they're solid, but they don't quite pull me in. Valor's Flagship is a 4 white 7/7 crew 3. It's got flying, first strike, lifelink. It also has cycling for X, 2 and a white, and when you cycle this card, you make X 1/1 pilot tokens. So unlike a lot of the vehicles we've looked at so far, this is not an aggressive vehicle, right? It's 7 mana, obviously. So this is for slower decks. You want it in your blue-white deck or your black-white deck. Sometimes you just cast it for 7 mana, and it's a pretty good thing to cast for 7 mana. Sometimes you cycle it, and you make your tokens. Maybe you reanimate it somehow. There's ways in white and black to do that with vehicles. There's Tune Up, which is the 4 mana reanimation spell for vehicles. So maybe you have a little bit of a artifact-centric deck where that card's pretty good. Reanimating the flagship on turn 4 is obviously very good. The cycling buyout mode on this is not great, right? Because if you're cycling, let's say that you've been stuck on 6 lands for a while, right? You just can't hit that 7th land. And you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to cycle this thing. You're paying 6 mana to make 3 pilot tokens and draw a card. Not the worst. Definitely not the worst, but I see that more as a way to get into the graveyard, or just like a true buyout mode where you're like, wow, I'm very far away from casting this card. I should just cycle this. So it doesn't add as much to the card as something like the Tension Chariot would, where a single mana to cycle, if it's not good, that's easy. It's a bit clunky to cycle this card. So I'm going to say this is a pull into a color. You have to be careful, not just put this in your aggressive white decks. It's not an aggressive white card. But yeah, in those slower decks, I think it is a pretty solid card. Aetherdrift is a 3 blue, 3/2 flyer, crew 3 vehicle. When it enters the battlefield, you draw 2 cards. This is a card that I have been increasingly less and less impressed with as I've played it and played against it more and more. I basically only play this card if I really just want another artifact in my deck. Maybe I've got Haunt the Network or 2 copies of that, and I just want to really make sure my artifact count is high. Or if I just end up without a lot of card advantage. I think most blue decks just really want to have, a good 2-3 ways to go up on cards, whether that be a Hull Drifter, or if you're luckier, Stock Up. That's definitely a better card draw spell. So I see this as firmly in the filler role player tier. It's never going to just be a instant, well, I put this card in my deck and it's going to make it better. But if you're a little low on card draw, if you're a little low on the artifact count and you need more artifacts, yeah, it certainly fills that role just fine. Possession Engine up next. This is a 3 blue, 5/5 crew 3 vehicle. When it enters, you get to steal one of your opponent's creatures. That thing cannot attack or block, but of course, it can still crew. And this is our first S tier card. This is one of the best cards in the set. Stealing an opponent's creature and doing, whatever is good to do with it, either crewing this vehicle, crewing something else. Even though the creature can't attack or block, it also can still activate its abilities. So if your opponent has an exhaust ability that they haven't used yet, something that maybe draws a card, or, the snake that gives you 2 lands, you can exhaust that. You can get some value before they get to steal their creature back eventually. In a lot of games, they just don't get to steal their creature back because you kill them before that happens. Worth noting, by the way, too, if you're playing against this card, make sure that if you have a vehicle on the battlefield, you want to crew that vehicle with the creature they're about to steal, so you give them a tapped creature, right? Giving them a tapped creature is quite a bit worse than them taking an untapped creature, so a little bit of a thing to note there. And another thing I haven't mentioned yet, but any 4 or 5 mana very good vehicle, I give a bit of a bump to because of Transit Mage, right? The 3 mana 2/2 in blue that goes and searches a 4 or 5 mana artifact, put that thing in your hand. So if you do happen to have a Possession Engine, Transit Mage just skyrockets in your pick orders. Already a very good card. But when you can guarantee you're getting one of the best cards in the set, makes it even better. Midnight Mangler is a 1 and a blue 3/3. It has crew 2, and it becomes an artifact creature on your opponent's turn. Another card that goes solidly in the filler tier. Kind of like Hull Drifter, where if you need to up your artifact count, or you just need it to fill the role of, hey, I didn't pick up enough cheap cards, I just want another card that will keep me alive early. Perfectly fine. Nothing special. You're never going to be sad about it. You're never going to be too happy about it. Yeah, I think just the definition of a filler card. Thopter Fabricator is a 2 and a blue 4/4 flyer, crew 2, and when you draw your second card each turn, you make a 1/1 Flying Thopter. Another card that goes straight into the best card in the set, S tier here. It requires a bit more deck building than the Possession Engine. Obviously, you need ways to trigger it. Well, I say you need ways to trigger it, but also the vanilla vehicle of 4/4 flyer crew 2. I would actually always play that card. So I think even then, even if you have no ways to trigger it, it's going to be a playable card. But you want to pick up some cycling cards, you want to pick up some card draw. If you're the cycling deck, this card is busted, but even if you've got, 4 or 5 ways to trigger it, if you trigger it once or twice, you're going to be very happy. So yeah, very firmly in the S tier for me as well. Ranger's Refueler is up next. This is a 1 and a blue for a 3/3 crew 2 vehicle. Whenever you activate an exhaust ability, you draw a card, and it has a 4 mana exhaust ability to put a +1/+1 counter on it and turn it into an artifact creature. So at its baseline, you can kind of think of this as a 6 mana 4/4 draw a card, right, creature. And that's just pretty good. And of course, it's in installment plans too, right? You can go 2/4. It's not just a 6 mana card. But when you also factor in the fact that all of your exhaust cards just draw you a card, and the exhaust cards in the set tend to be pretty good. This is one of the best uncommons. I take it extremely highly. I want to, in my heart of hearts, I want to put it in the S tier, but I think, responsibly, it just goes in the A tier. Always play, pick highly, great card. Demonic Junker is a 6 and a black 4/3 vehicle with crew 2. It's got affinity for artifacts, so it costs 1 less for each artifact you control. When it enters, for each player, destroy up to 1 target creature that player controls. And if you destroy a creature you control this way, you put 2 +1/+1 counters on the Junker. Yeah, I like this card a decent amount. It is a card that has a, I would say, minor deck building cost. It is nice to reduce this to, 3-4 mana. Ideally, you're paying, not the 7 mana. But it's not an artifact exclusive card. Like, I played this in my black-green decks because, just have a Grim Bauble lying around. It tends to be pretty easy to get this below 7 mana. So you can really optimize for this in a blue-black deck, of course, or maybe splashing it in blue-white deck. But yeah, even like in a black-green deck. And the nice thing about it in black-green is that it's a removal spell you can reanimate, if you want to kind of look at it that way, right? Like, a lot of your reanimation spells turn to, well, do I want this giant creature or do I want this removal spell, this Junker that's in the graveyard? So yeah, it gives you a little bit of utility there, a little bit of a deck building cost, not just a slam dunk, but flexible enough, powerful enough. I'm going to put it in the A tier. Always play, pick highly. Cryptcolor Chariot is a 3 and a black 5/5 crew 2 vehicle. It's got menace. And whenever you discard one or more cards, you make a 2/2 tapped zombie token. So this is pretty comparable in its effect to the Thopter Fabricator. Wants to be played with cycling cards, anything that discards. I think it's a lot trickier to make work because, one, I think the payoff of making a 1/1 Thopter is better than a 2/2 zombie. But also, the main thing here is that it's not in the discard colors, right? It's not in blue and red. Now, there are some cycling cards in black, for what it's worth. Like, it's not just like, well, there's no support for this card. But if you're playing this card, I would have to say you're pairing it with red, maybe. So, like, you're a red-black deck with red cycling cards. Maybe you've got the 2-mana enchantment that discards a card and you draw 2 cards. Maybe you're splashing it in a blue-red deck. So I think that it both is a little bit clunky, a little bit hard to find a home for. I have seen a deck or two where I thought it looked pretty good, but unlike the Thopter Fabricator, I think the rate on it is also not as good, right? I much prefer 3 mana 4/4 flyer for crew 2 rather than 4 mana 5/5 menace crew 2. I think that's just a little bit worse. So all in all, it's got some potential. There are some decks that it works in, but I would even put this in like the generally avoid category. And that might not be exactly telling the full story, because like I said, there are decks that I think can make it good, but I would look at this more of like, well, if you see it in a pack, look at your cards like, do I have the cards that make it work? Or if you're blue-red, like, did I pick up black fixing randomly? I wouldn't really think of it as like, oh, take this card and build around it, because I don't think the payoff is all that amazing, and I think that it is a little bit hard to get going. Carrion Cruiser is a 2 and a black 3/2 crew 1 vehicle. When it enters, you mill 2 cards, and you can return a creature or a vehicle from your graveyard to your hand. Yeah, I like this card. It's just a solid little card, plays pretty well in basically all the black decks. I mean, maybe black-red, where you're really focused on attacking, it loses a bit of luster, but even in some black-red decks, like, you're a little bit slower. Really good for black-green, just filling the graveyard, recurring things. Pretty good in, like, a blue-black deck, just as, like, a value card. Yeah, really nothing to dislike about this card. It doesn't attack all that well, but, it blocks just fine. So I'm going to put it in the B tier. Pull into a color. Yeah, I really liked it. Here's an interesting one. The Last Ride. So this is a single black mana for a 13/13, but it's got the Death Shadows text of it gets -X, where X is your life total. Its crew cost is 2, and has the ability 2 and a black, pay 2 life, draw a card. I have been pleasantly surprised with this one. I think it's a really tricky card to use, especially if you haven't played with Death Shadow. Like, if you're not a Modern player, if you don't watch Modern at all, the play patterns for this kind of card, playing with it and against it, can kind of be unintuitive, because your opponent maybe plays this on turn 1, and let's just say you got a decent beatdown going. And you're like, yeah, they played a card that doesn't do anything. What are they going to do? Pay 3 mana, draw a card with it? And you start beating them down, get them down to like 5. And then all of a sudden, this thing that you weren't really paying attention to is a pretty big threat. And it just blocks everything. And crew 2 is pretty low. So playing against it, yeah, a little bit tricky. Playing with it, also a little bit tricky. I think it really asks you as a player to know when you can afford to pay 3 mana to pay 2 life, draw a card, when it's not the right thing to do, and especially in those times, in the in-between times where it's like, well, you know, I'm a little bit behind on board here, I'm a little bit behind on life, but maybe if I do pay the life, draw a card, I can either find a answer to what they have that I can't deal with right now, but also I might just want to pay the life so it becomes a pretty good blocker. I think it's a skill testing card. Let me put it that way. There's also like a weird unintuitive combat thing that happens with this card. Death Shadows players will know about this, but I'm going to try to do my best to describe this without getting too deep into detail of what's going on. But essentially, when you block with a last ride, let's just say your opponent is attacking you with 3 creatures, and the last ride, you got the last ride and something that can crew it. You crew it, it's a 5/5, you block your opponent's 5/5. It's really strange what happens with this card, but because damage goes through before state-based actions are checked to say like, okay, has this creature been dealt lethal damage and should it go to the graveyard? You lose life from the unblocked creatures attacking you, and the last ride will actually grow out of range of that 5/5 that it blocked, and it'll actually eat the 5/5. So it's not like a 5/5 and a 5/5 trade if one of those 5/5s is the last ride. Because you are being dealt damage from your opponent attacking you, this thing actually gets bigger. Before the game says, oh, is lethal damage marked? It'll actually be, whatever, a 9/9 at that point. So another sort of tricky thing about that card, and, the rules intricacies on that, I'm probably not explaining it the best, but if you want a deep dive on that, you can look it up on Google. There might even be a YouTube video about it. But, overall, just a hard card to use. I think it is powerful, though. I think that it does have a place. I would consider this I'm having a hard time putting this in a tier because I think it is just bordering on pull into a color, but I would only say that it's true if you have confidence that you can play with this card well. Because like I said, it's a skill testing card, there's a lot of play to it, and it's not just going to be like, if I just put this in my deck, it's going to be good. It does require a lot of understanding of what's going on in the game, what you need to make this card good, when you should pay mana to draw cards with it. So yeah, kind of a tough one. Ripclaw Wrangler is a 3 and a black 4/3 that when it enters, each opponent discards a card and crew for 2. Another one that I'm going to put in the generally avoid tier. Another one that if it was just a creature, like a 4 mana 4/3, your opponent discards a card. Yeah, that would be a good card. It would be a really good card, but it being a vehicle, just makes it a bit more clunky. So not a card I generally play. Also not a card I think is unplayable. So not the worst 23rd card, but I think does belong in the D tier. Clamorous Ironclad is a 3 and a red 6/3 with cycling for a single red mana. It has Menace, and it has Crew 3. So this one is sort of weird, because I think it's not a vehicle, for the most part. It is a cycling 1 card, right? It's a single mana cycling card for your decks that care about that sometimes you will cast as the 6/3 vehicle. One thing to note about this card is it's a sort of combo-y card with the Pusher Limits, which is the 7 mana sorcery that reanimates all your vehicles and gives them haste, and you sacrifice them in a turn. I have seen a deck or two where the goal is just have 4 or 5 of these things. You pick them up pretty late, and you cycle, and then eventually you reanimate them. So there's something there. I'm gonna put this in the filler role player tier because that's what I think it is. I think it is a role player for the blue-red deck. But, again, just don't look at this as much as a vehicle. Look at more as a cycling card. Gastel Thrillseeker is a 2 and a red 4/2 trample haste that when it enters, it crews itself. And its crew cost is 2. You can also pay 3 mana and discard a card to return this from your graveyard to the battlefield, but it gains a finality counter, so you can only do this once. A pretty solid aggressive card, 4/2 trample haste, that comes back at some point. Nothing too wrong with that. Gonna put this in the filler tier. Power level wise, it's a bit more of a good uncommon rather than a rare. But certainly a playable card. It's a card that I actually haven't played that much yet because it's a rare that I think people take a little bit higher than they ought to, so I just don't see that often. But nothing wrong with the card. Boom Mobile is a 2 red 5/5 that when it enters, you add 4 red mana of any color, and you can spend this only to activate abilities. It has an exhaust cost of X 2 and a red. This vehicle deals X damage to target creature, and you put a 1/1 counter on it. I like this card a lot. So baseline, if you play it for 4 mana, you get to kill a 1/1, right? Or sorry, an X1 creature. And, there's like a ton of those running around, but you kill a Thopter, maybe you kill like a 2 mana 2/1. It happens sometimes. I think more often what happens is you play this on 4 and you activate an exhaust ability right away, or you play this on 5 or 6 and you kill an X2 or an X3. Just a lot of flexibility. Like, it's a 6/6 vehicle, crew 2, like that's really beefy for the crew cost. So yeah, I like it. I would put this in the A tier. Always pick highly. Burner Rocket is 1 in red for a 3/1 crew 1. It's got flash, and when it enters, target creature gets +2/+0 and gains trample. I had high hopes for this card. I thought this card looked like it would be something pretty interesting. Turns out that both sides are just kind of lackluster enough that you never really want to play it. Like, the +2/+0, it doesn't win a combat, it just pushes a little bit of damage. So maybe you care about it if you're like targeting a Tarion or something, right? The vanilla 9/7, sure, that might push a little bit of damage, but on your average creature, it's not going to be that good. It's not going to help it win combat. And then the 2-mana 3/1 crew 1 vehicle, that's kind of whatever. So I generally avoid this one. I could see a deck like your red-green combat trick heavy, where you just wanted this card, you wanted the trample, you valued it for that. But for the most part, I don't put this card in my deck. Fire Mech Cycle up next. 4 in a red for a 5/4 crew 2 vehicle. It's got haste, and it's also got an exhaust ability. You can tap a untapped mount or saddle creature you control, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, and it becomes an artifact creature. I've not been very impressed with this card. I think the impact of a big hasty creature is really diminished when you have to tap another creature to be able to attack with it, because the idea is like, you know, you're pressuring, and then the big hasty thing comes down and your opponent's even under more pressure. But when some of your attacking force gets taken out of the equation to jam your 5/4 haste, it's a lot less appealing. Also, the ability to tap another mount or a vehicle to turn on, like, it's a nice little something, but I'm not like, I don't value that highly. I don't think that adds to the card so much. I've been generally avoiding this card, so I think it flies somewhere between the C and the D tier. I'm going to put it in the D tier. I could see some other people maybe arguing for the C tier, but yeah, I just haven't been too impressed with it. It's an expensive card. It's a 5-mana card that doesn't give you that much, so yeah, just not too into it. Veloheart Bike is a 2 and a green 4/2. That when it enters, you gain 2 life. It taps to add a mana of any color, and it has crew 2. I really like this card. I've come up on this card a ton. Part of this is just that I've been playing more multicolor decks, but part of it is I think it's just a good mana fixer. Like, it gains you 2 life, which makes up for the fact that it doesn't like do that much when it comes in. It adds a mana of any color, so it's a 5-color fixer. Crew 2, pretty low crew cost. It's a good thing to just block with if you don't need the mana anymore. So, you know, I'm not trying to say it's a pull into green or anything like that, but it definitely belongs in that C tier of good filler, good role player. I've sometimes played it in 2-color decks when I've cared about the artifacts. So let's say like I'm a black-green deck, and I've got some Packdoll Terrors where I want the drain, I want more artifacts in my deck. Sometimes it just makes the cut there. Mostly, I'm seeing it as a fixing tool that does other things, but it's just a good package, right? All 3 things that are going on here, it being a vehicle, it being a mana rock, and it gaining a little bit of life, all good things to like about it. Thunderous Velocipede is a 1 green 5/5 trample, crew 3, and when another creature enters, if it is a small creature, mana value 4 or less, it comes with a +1/+1 counter. If it's a big thing, it comes with 3 +1/+1 counters. It's a good card. You have to be worried about the 1 green cost. You make sure that your deck has 10, 11 green sources so you can cast this reliably on turn 3. But it's massive. 5/5 trample, makes all your other creatures better. I think not quite in that S tier, more in the A, always pick highly tier. It's good, not busted. So yeah, we're going to put it in the A tier. One that is going to go in that S tier, though, is Lumbering Worldwagon. So this is 2 and a green for a star 4, crew 4. When it enters or attacks, you get to search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield, and this thing's power is equal to the number of lands you control. Yeah, if you haven't played with or against this card, it reads fairly well. It's like, yeah, it looks like it does pretty good stuff, but it comes down on turn 3, ramps you right away, and then just threatens to attack for tons of damage every single turn. And the really nice thing is 4 toughness on this card. I think it would be substantially worse if it was 3 toughness, because that 4 toughness means it often can attack cleanly on turn 4. Your opponent won't often be able to profitably block with this. They will have to risk a double block, which is never good, so they just might not risk that. Huge threat, ramps you. Yeah, one of the best cards in the set. Earth Rumbler is a 4 and a green 7/6 Vigilance Trample creature with a crew cost of 3, but you can also crew it by exiling an artifact or a creature from your graveyard. Yeah, I really like this one. Been pretty impressed with it. It's really, really big. It attacks, it blocks, it has threat of activation where you don't really have to exile something from the graveyard for it to block. If your opponent can't attack into a 6 toughness creature, it kind of just sits there and goes like, all right, well, you can't attack with your 5/5s because I could exile something from the graveyard. So yeah, I've generally just liked it. I would put it into the B tier. It's a pull into green. Okay, gold card time now. So Cloud Spire Sky Cycle. This is the Boros vehicle at Uncommon. 2/3 flyer crew 1. When it enters, you put 2 counters on something, or distribute 2 counters. And this card gets a huge knock, just being a red-white aggro card, a deck you really don't want to be in. And honestly, even if you do end up in like a pretty solid version of that deck, it's not that good of a card. It's fine. You know, it's the kind of creatures that come in, put counters on something. Those are generally pretty good, but once again, you know, say it with me, it being a vehicle is a hoop to jump through and just worse than if it was just a creature. So, gonna put this in the generally avoid tier because it's not that powerful and it's in a deck that I don't want to be in. Apocalypse Runner is the Rakdos one. So this is a 4-mana 6/5 crew 3 vehicle. You can tap it to give a creature with power 2 or less unblockable and lifelink. Yeah, I found this one to be fine. I like red-black fine enough as an aggressive deck. It's a fine way to push a little bit of damage. You know, it is pretty big. Hitting for 6 even just once with this is good. So yeah, nothing that'll pull me into red-black, but a solid filler card there. Dune Drifter is X-Black-White for a 3/3 crew 2 vehicle. When it enters, you reanimate a artifact or creature with mana value X. Yeah, I like this card. Just good in the kind of board style-y black-white decks. A little bit of value. You can reanimate a cheap value creature, or maybe reanimate something like a 1/1 Death Touch Rat. So I do think this is a pull into being black-white, just like the other black-white uncommon. Very good with the other black-white uncommon, by the way, just reanimating the Ascendant, right? The kind of Blood Artist that comes with the 2/2. So I would say this is a pull into the color, right? Pull into the color pair. When we're going through these gold cards, I kind of think of it as like, well, does this make you want to be this color pair specifically? And I think Dune Drifter qualifies for that. Boosted Sloop, the Is It one. This is the 3/3 crew 1 menace. And whenever you attack, you draw a card, discard a card. Yeah, I really like this card. It is a blue-red card mostly, but I splashed it here and there in like a Grixis deck, even like a multicolor deck. I've played it once where I just had the fixing and I wanted a bit more filtering. I think this teeters between the B tier and the A tier, but it goes enough places. It's a strong enough card. I'm going to put it in the A tier personally. Always pick highly. Guide-like Pathmaker is the Ozorius one. So it's the 6-mana 6/5 crew 2 Vigilance. When it enters, you search your library for an artifact, and if that artifact was mana value 2 or less, you can put it on the battlefield. I like this card. I don't love this card. It's not a card that I like splash or anything. Usually it's just like a blue-white exclusive card. It'll get better the more good targets you have to get, of course. It's nice to have a spread of a really good expensive thing to get and a cheap thing you can get to crew this right away if you just need the blocker or attacker. So yeah, not quite a pull into these colors. I would put it more in the filler role player tier, but yeah, card I like. Debris Beetle, this is an easy one. This one's a rare. This is the 4-mana Golgari card, 6/6 trample crew 2. When it enters, you drain your opponent for 3 life. Yeah, just straight up in the S tier. I played a lot of this card, either in black-green or splashing it in like a blue-green deck or something. Just fantastic. And joining it will be another black-green card, Thunderous Broodwagon. That's going to go into the S tier as well for me. This is the 6-mana, come in, kill a 4-mana value or less thing, 6/5, menace, reach creature. Yeah, great. Cycling on this card too. Crew 3, you know, it's a little bit tough, but not too bad for getting a 6/5 menace reach. Sometimes you'll reanimate this early when you cycle it, then just reanimate it on turn 5. Sometimes you attack, block with it, it trades off, then you reanimate it. Just so many good things to say about this card. One of the more underrated cards for myself in previous season. Definitely missed on this one, but yeah, I've been playing a lot of Broodwagons, and hopefully that doesn't change anytime soon. Hopefully people continue to pass me Broodwagons, because that's been happening a lot. The Dimir one, Haunted Hellride, is a 3-mana 3/3 crew 1. Then whenever you attack, target creature gets +1/+0 Death Touch. You untap that creature. Again, sort of just a filler card. In blue-black, you want artifacts, so it gets a little bit of a bump because of that, but nothing too special. You know, if you've got like some of the Wicker folks, the 1/3 flyers, or the blue 1/3 flyer that exhausts for 5 mana, this goes up in value a little bit, just having like a 2-drop that can get in evasively, and then, you know, maybe you block with it, maybe you crew with that thing on block, or threaten to block with the 3/3 vehicles. It's an okay card, kind of the same as the Runner and the Pathmaker here, just fine to fill out your deck. Rocketeer Boost Buggy, the Gruul one, 3/2 crew 1. When it attacks, you make a treasure, and you can exhaust it, 3 mana, to make it into an artifact creature and put a counter on it. Yeah, I love this card. This is another one that sort of borders on always pick highly and pull into a color. I'm going to put it more into the pull into a color pair because unlike, you know, something like Sloop where I'm more likely to splash that card, Boost Buggy is a card you really want to play on turn 2 every single time. You really want to make sure that you can cast that early, start getting in, lose a lot of luster if it's on the splash or anything. So it's a good card, very much pull into red-green, but not as splashable. The Simic one, the Aether Hive, this is the 3-mana 3/5 Vigilant crew 1. Whenever you use an exhaust ability, you make a 1/1 Flying Thopter. Yeah, this card is great. Another card, it's really, really good in its color pair. It is splashable in some decks. Like I can see a red-green slower deck that splashes this card if you just have a lot of exhaust abilities. So, yep, I've been playing a lot of this card too. Really, really like this one. All right, now the colorless card. So, Marshall's Path Cruiser. This has been an interesting one. Yeah, this one another one I started really low on, and I've come up as I played more and more in it. You can kind of just think of it as a Pilgrim's Eye sort of effect. A Skittering Surveyor, these 3-mana artifacts that draw you a land and then are some sort of creature. The thing that I didn't notice about this card before playing it is you might think that it's not that good of a vehicle, right? It's crew 5, 6/5, like you're not really getting that much. The exhaust ability obviously plays a part here, but not every deck can activate it. But the fact that it kind of just sits there, and if you've got a 1/1 and a 2/2 and a 2/2, your opponent's 4/4s can't attack into you. It just kind of sits there and you can threaten to crew it. Also, at some point, if you do have the mana, becoming a really, really large creature is nice. So yeah, just have been coming up and up and up on it. It's not a card you want if you're not splashing. It is a splash enabler, kind of like the Veloheart bike. But if you're there, yeah, I think it's, pull into a color. This is a weird thing to say, but you can kind of view it as pull into or really good in the multicolor decks. Lifecraft Engine, this is the 3-mana 4/4 crew 3 that has a lot of abilities that pump a certain creature type, and I think mostly this is a generally avoid. I can see a deck once in a while where you have a lot of, zombies or something, like in a black-white deck, but the creature type matter synergies in this format are, almost non-existent, so I don't think you get much use out of it. I'm just going to put it in the D tier. And then in Easy S is Sky Sovereign. This is from OG Kaladesh, one of the OG vehicles. 5-mana 6/5 flyer, crew 3. When it attacks or enters, you deal 3 to a creature or a planeswalker. Not much to say, just this gigantic flying machine that kills you and kills your opponent's stuff. One of the best cards in the set, and probably the #1 card to first pick, because it's just a colorless card, you're gonna play it everywhere. Rover Blades is technically a vehicle. It's a 3-mana 2/2, crew 2. It has double strike, and also is an equipment. Equip cost for 4, the equipped creature gains double strike. Another card I've been coming up a little bit on. As I've been playing more aggressive decks, as I've been finding good ways to push damage. I think if you're a green-white or a green-red aggressive deck with some chonky creatures, it's a good way to keep those attacking. So nothing I take highly, and generally a card that wheels, so solidly a C card, but one that I have been, again, kind of playing a little more often than I would have expected. And finally, we can put, I think, just in the generally avoid tier, Skybox Fairy, 5-mana 4/4 flyer, crew 2, cycling for 2 mana. Most of the time when I play this card, it's because I just need one more cycler in my blue-red decks or something. But yeah, it doesn't really do anything special. The rate on it's not very good, so it does not make my deck very often. I think maybe I've played it twice, and that was because, yeah, I just needed one more cycler. And that's going to be it. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you found this fun. And yeah, here's a little bit of a screenshot of the final tier list. If you feel like there's any cards that you would have rated a little bit differently, of course, let me know in the comments. If you like this video, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.